anyway, the next is commercial, urban, and suburban. Office is really a commodity type of business. Now, the architects can make a big difference here. Not only that, architects make brands. Some architects are brands, and very often people want to go into a building of a certain architect. So it's important. Architecture is a very important thing in terms of office buildings. It's Gene Cohn, who's coming here on the 29th of September. Gene's an old friend of mine. He's a wonderful architect. He and Pedersen have been partners for 30 years. I knew him when they worked for John Warneke before. John died last year. It was too bad. He's a wonderful architect, wonderful man. And they're a wonderful team. They're the ones that have done all these big buildings in Asia recently. They just completed the second tallest building in the world. I think it's in Indonesia. He's coming here. I'm very happy to see he's coming here, and I think he'll be an excellent learning experience for all of you. Anyway, there are one-tenant type of office buildings. As an example, a bank goes out and wants a building for the bank, and they don't want to share the space with anyone. That's a one-purpose building. And then there's multi-purpose building. This is the Chrysler building. We didn't build that. It's about 60, let's say it's about 70-some years old. I could have built it, as I'm much older than that, but still I didn't do it. We did do, there's also in addition to other types, I'll get back to the office building thing in a few minutes. There are additionally, of course, commercial, urban, and suburban hotels are really short-term residential buildings, recreation, sports and entertainment, warehousing, educational buildings, and industrial buildings like Albert Kahn, who was a great industrial. He was the one who invented the modern factory building. He invented it by first designing the line, which he presented to Mr. Ford, and then, under his description, he would build an envelope over it. That was the theory. And that theory of development still maintains itself in industrial. All right, here's a question. What factors determine the highest and best use of a parcel of real estate? Who's going to tackle that? Not me again. Yes.
You want me to?
Yes.
At the end of the day, the value of the land is how much money somebody can make using the land. So if you're in agriculture, which is where my dad started, then the opportunity.
That's my son.
Yeah, I'm Bobby. The opportunity to be able to build, a tall office building on grazing land doesn't exist because there isn't the density around it for the population to support the building that actually is going to work there. So if you don't have a piece of land that has that opportunity, then maybe it's grazing land, maybe it's farming land. But as you get closer in, what he's trying to explain in all of this is that as you get closer in to urban settings or urban population or even small towns, now people want to interact with one another. And the opportunity for value of the land is greater because they're using the land in a different way, in a higher quality way. It moves from animals to people to then different forms of commercial. So in the context of what factors determine the highest and best use, it is, in fact, how is it being used? In what form, in what density, and can somebody make a lot of money off of it? And when you talk about like Madison Avenue retail, and it is the sociographics, the demographics. It's how much sales volume potential is there for that tenant. Because at the end of the day, it's how much money he can make. If he doesn't have people in front of his store that are going to buy goods from him, then he doesn't have any sales, well, he's not going to make enough money to be able to pay the rent. And if he can't pay rent, and he can't, and in Madison Avenue you can pay a lot of rent. The more rent you can pay, the more income stream can be derived from that land. And what the developer does is actually create a building that houses that retailer, that then gives them the added value opportunity to create more income. And then, as my dad pointed out earlier, you then multiply that income stream by, in essence, a capitalization rate, or by whatever return you want, or what the market wants. And that's establishing the value for the building and the land. But underlying the value is always the land and the opportunity of the land. So, you've got to determine, as you work through this thought process of land economics, what is the highest and best use of the land? And there's a number of factors that come into play as you come to that judgment.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's get into the value of the property is directly related to use of the property, as Bob said. The architect can add value by being in a position to help the client identify the highest and best use. Now, use determined by the client and the nature of the client's business and investment objectives, the advantages, disadvantages of location, access, population, current and future, adjacent uses, and the local economy. Now, we go through this, the client and the nature of the client's business. That means that the client could be a merchant, the client can be a manufacturer, and the client is talking about office space. So do you do a building that shares additional space for future expansion? Do you do a building that only builds the space that he says they want at this time? Well, in studying the use, in studying the way the person uses the space, assuming he's in business now, you can determine as to what his growth may be and what his needs may be. Years ago, I was given the job of building the hospital at University of Michigan. I was chairman of the building committee. And we went around and reviewed the doctor's spaces. If we had just used what they said they needed, we would have had to build a building twice as big as the building we built, which we couldn't obviously afford. Because the space, as people understand space, and as clients understand space, is not real space. They assume they need 1,400 square feet, when the actual use of the space they need might only be 600 square feet, 700 or 800 square feet. So this is, yes, ma'am.
How do you determine that?
How do you determine that? Well, number one, you go through how they operate in the space they have. That's the first thing you do. And there's a lot of parallels between dermatologists, as an example. Another dermatologist may use his space differently or may have additional people or something, but basically the space is similar. And that's the first determination you use. You try to satisfy the doctor who is the client in the best way that the space can be laid out. And the equipment, today there's a big problem in hospitals in terms of bringing in new equipment because they're inventing new types of Siemens, new MRI machine. It takes huge space. And they don't always have the space, or they can't, the buildings aren't designed with the loads to take it. And it's a problem. It's a problem bringing the units in. But the architects have to be able to foresee those kind of needs. That's what an architect's role is. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, I was going to ask you if to comment on just two other areas. One is, and this may be similar to access, which is typically provided by the public, roadways or transit
Yeah,
or
sure.
whatever. The availability of adequate utilities to serve the property, that's point number one. Then second, what stock as a developer do you put in the urban policies that are there, the zoning ordinance and things like that? Is that something that you just deal with, or something you have to overcome or work with, or what?
Well, that's a problem. we have a project in Long Island that we've been, 14 years trying to rezone? More? 16 years? 15, we've been many years. We own the property. We own the property. We love the property. We're in love with the property. I guess we were always in love with the property. That's how we got married to the property. But we know eventually we'll build it. You have to have a lot of, yes.
But that's you have as a developer, and the property owner, you have a definition of what you think highest and best use is, and the city who has zoned the property has a different definition.
Yes, that's true. That's true, and they may be right. So that's what the developer has to have a sense in. I never used to buy land, but it was different. I would option, I would pay the price, I would do all kinds of things. So I didn't have to close until I bought the land. I didn't have to close the land sale, until the time came I was ready to build. That's not always available today. I mean, this was an industrial site. I know we're going to build it eventually. The reason this happened is because it's probably one of the greatest sites in America. And it's a big empty area with nothing but wealthy people there. Acres and acres of wealthy people. And the shopping opportunities aren't there. 15 miles one way and 14 miles the other. And they're not of the quality of a center we will build. But we'll eventually build. But anyway, to answer that question, this wasn't a question of really zoning. Because from a practical point of view, we were upgrading the land. We were going from industrial to commercial. There's nothing around us, so it doesn't happen immediately around us. So it wasn't a cause of inconveniencing anybody in terms of traffic or anything. The question, it was political. And that's something that you'll run into in your life. You'll run into a situation where politics will determine how something happens. Not necessarily good sense, not necessarily there's 2,000 or 3,000 people like to go to work there, which is important. Those things aren't taken in consideration. It's a political thing, and that's what's holding it up. I'm sure we'll get it. There's no question in my mind. Yes, sir.
I think in answer to your question, entitlement process, entitlement availability, as well as utilities and infrastructure do impact land cost, if that's your question.
Yeah, I mean,
Somewhat.
it helps to define location for you, right? It helps to define the highest and best use. I mean, if you know you have to spend tens of millions of dollars bringing in utilities because they don't exist on the site, it makes the site less desirable, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a cost factor.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no question. That's taken in consideration when you're adding up your cost. I mean, bringing in utilities is part of the cost.